Morgan was born and raised in Charleston, West Virginia, and is currently the Climate and Energy Program Manager at the West Virginia Citizens Action Group, working on petrochemicals, hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization and storage, and community air monitoring. Previously, she worked on climate issues in the state with the Climate Reality Project and the West Virginia Rivers Coalition, and she was selected for the Carbon Removal Justice Fellowship hosted by American University and National Wildlife Federation, which aim to center environmental justice in carbon removal policy. I spent decades doing some of that with the government, so I know what you're talking about. Her academic background focused on improving access to clean water and energy and ensuring a just transition to address the climate emergency. Morgan is a Fulbright and Marshall Scholar, an opportunity which afforded her opportunities which allowed her to live in Spain and England for 3 years after college. In Madrid, she introduced the Sustainable Development Goals to high schoolers and other local communities. She earned a master's degree in environmental systems engineering from University College of London and a master's in public policy from the University of Cambridge. She has a degree in civil engineering from West Virginia University.
Thank you so much, and apologies for the incorrect date. You know, 2025 has been really long, at least on my end. I don't know about you all, and I think I was thinking that we were surely at least 11 months into this crazy year, not just 10. So thanks for bearing with me. When y'all get the slides after this presentation, it'll have the updated date for your records. But thank you so much for having me. As mentioned, I work with West Virginia Citizen Action Group and organize with them around climate and energy issues. And today, I was asked to talk a little bit about the impact of energy, and specifically data centers, which we'll get into in a little bit, and the economic and environmental impacts of these new large energy proposals across the state, and some solutions that we can look at to address some of these challenges. So a little bit before we begin about West Virginia Citizen Action Group. Some of you all might be familiar because as Mountaineers Indivisible Citizen Action, y'all are affiliated with our statewide organization, West Virginia Citizen Action Group. And we're so lucky to have y'all in the movement with us. And we've been around for now 51 years, since 1974, where we've been working on public policy issues, organizing around a clean environment, affordable healthcare for all, as well as around a stronger democracy. So those are our three core programs: our climate program, our healthcare program, and our democracy program. And I manage our climate team, which is our largest. We're actually about to be posting a job hire posting soon in just a month for a fourth member on our team. So we've grown from 0 members just a year and a half ago of just a dedicated climate team to now, in a couple months, 4 members, which we're really excited about. But what's relevant today is when we talk about energy and data centers, these 3 programs, our climate, our shared environment, having a healthy community and access to strong healthcare and social services, as well as a strong democratic and transparent system, all of these programs can be connected back to data centers in this data center boom that we're facing in West Virginia. And we'll talk a little bit about that as I get into these slides. So this is the description that y'all probably received as the pitch of what we're gonna be talking about. And so as a summary, a kind of TLDR before we get into the meat of it all, we've seen a big change at our state and federal level trying to incentivize the growth of data centers given the boom of AI demands. And we've seen just this year a massive spike in our legislators paying attention to data centers and trying to incentivize bringing them here. And now we're seeing proposals and developments that are moving through the permitting process to enable these data centers. But we also have a lot of risks that come with them on the economic front, on the health front, and on the environmental front. And so I'll go through some of those, and then we'll talk about some policy interventions and specifically some organizing programs that we're working on at Citizen Action Group that can address this, some would say, crisis of just rapidly deploying data center development across the state. So we'll start a little bit with background and the legislative context. So if you've not heard anything about data centers in West Virginia, don't worry, it's happened incredibly quick. Just in the past couple years, we've seen a boom in AI and data center development. And this is very much a result of the increased data generation in generative AI and cloud computing systems. We're just seeing a demand of more data needing to be stored and processed, whether that's using it through AI systems like ChatGPT, all the way to arguably more productive uses of AI, like medical AI, and using it to try to solve some of our world's biggest crises through machine learning and other technologies. So we're seeing that these data centers are being constructed at an unprecedented rate to be able to accommodate this growth of data demand across the country. And so some factoids to put that into perspective. We've seen just in 2014, so just over 10 years ago, in the office real estate world, so the amount of money that the real estate sector spent on constructing offices, only about 5% of that was focused on data centers. And then just last year, it's increased up to about a third of all office real estate construction costs are on data centers, which is a significant increase. And we're seeing also just that increase our energy demand too, which we'll get into a little later. It's expected to increase our data center power demand by 165% just by 2030. And so some questions that I don't have the answer to, but perhaps we can think about throughout this presentation too, and as we think about how to approach data centers and AI in West Virginia, is this AI boom that we're seeing and this growth of data centers, is it a bubble? And are we going to see a bust from it as demand increases? Is it going to stagnate out? Are we building too much too fast? And are we going to be left with the remains of non-functioning data centers or functioning data centers that could cause harm to our communities? So to lay the groundwork of the data centers that we're seeing in West Virginia, there's 4 explicit proposals that we're aware of, and there's also some rumors of other ones. They've just not been as officially documented, like through permitting or press releases. The first you may have heard of is in Tucker County by Davis, West Virginia. It's by Fundamental Data, and it's the Ridgeline facility. This would be a very massive complex. It would be the largest proposed in the state as of now. And essentially, they would be trying to operate on a microgrid, which means they're building a gas-fired power plant that would power this data center to meet the demand, so to avoid pulling energy off the grid. But on the other hand, that means they're building a massive gas-fired power plant in the middle of the Mon Forest, right by where folks recreate and live. This has had a massive amount of outrage. You may have heard of Tucker United. They're doing incredible work around that. And they challenged the permit. They've appealed it, despite massive public outrage around an air construction permit for this gas plant. Our Department of Environmental Protection greenlit it anyway. 2 identical data centers are also proposed for Mingo County, which is in the southern part of the state. So those are those 2 stars there at the bottom. Those are in Warncliffe and Holden. So Warncliffe is kind of to the southern border of West Virginia, and Holden is right on the border of Logan and Mingo counties. And they applied for an air construction permit, which they were granted, both of them for the 2 identical sites, for 2 gas-fired power plants that would power 2 identical data centers through this company called Adams Fork. This company is also trying to build the world's largest ammonia plant in Mingo County too. So there's a lot of boondoggles, some might say, going on, which is no surprise to the history of southern West Virginia, happening yet again, just this new era of extraction. And then finally, I'd say one that the fewest folks are aware of is a proposal for a data center in Mason County, just outside, just north of Point Pleasant. So that's where Mothman's from, if you've heard of that. And that's right on the Ohio River. A company called Fidelis New Energy has proposed a massive complex of various proposals, including the Monarch AI data center, which would be interconnected with some other facilities that are currently moving forward in the permitting process, such as a bioenergy with carbon capture and storage plant, a gas-based hydrogen and carbon capture plant that would require carbon pipelines and a carbon injection well. And then in theory, portions of those plants would power the data center based on the information we have now. But the data center in Mason County has not moved forward explicitly with permitting. It's their separate but affiliated projects. So that's where we're at right now. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot. And unfortunately, there's probably more to come. We've heard rumors of data center proposals in Wood County and Jefferson County, but nothing solid at this point. And so you might ask, well, what's the big deal? Why is this happening all of a sudden? During the legislative session this past year in 2025, Governor Morrissey made it his priority to bring data centers to West Virginia and make West Virginia the newest hub of data centers. And he did this by pushing the legislature to pass his flagship bill, House Bill 2014, which is the Certified Microgrid Program. This picture right here from this West Virginia Watch article is where he signed the bill later in the month. It was passed on April 12th, the last day of legislative session, right up until the end. At the end of the month, he signed it in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, just outside of the location where that Monarch Cloud Computing Center is being proposed. And it would enable microgrids and incentivize microgrids for data center development across the state. So I just mentioned examples of microgrids that would support Tucker County and Mingo County. Those specific sites were enabled very much so by this piece of legislation. And it's really focusing on what they call high-impact data centers, so larger scale data centers that are projected to bring larger amounts of tax dollars to West Virginia. But there's a catch. Even if you don't care about the environmental impacts of data centers or other economic impacts, and you think, well, it's just business, we're bringing in money, we need a better tax base, we're seeing our state cut programs left and right, cut the state income tax, we need revenue. You might think this could bring in a lot of money, and perhaps it could. However, we're not going to see it locally where those data centers are proposed. So what happened was they proposed a new tax structure for data center development, and specifically for the microgrids for data centers. And originally, the majority, if not all, of the tax base was proposed to go back to the state, so it would not be seen locally. And when that was proposed in the initial legislation, we saw people across the aisle, even far-right county commissioners, get very frustrated about that, understandably, because especially in places like Mingo County or Tucker County, these are places that could benefit tremendously from that new tax base that could be coming in. And we saw county commissioners go to the Capitol and push back against these provisions in the bill. And we did see some modifications that made the tax structure a little less bad, but arguably still not great. So this lists what the tax structure is now. So now 50% of the data center tax base would go to the Personal Income Tax Reduction Fund. 30% would stay in the county where the data center is located. 10% would be split among the remaining 54 counties on a per capita basis using census data. And then 5% would go to a grant fund, and then another 5% would be going to a newly created grant fund or a newly created fund. And this is strictly for property taxes. And you can think about how this could be a burden, especially to school systems. We're seeing constant cuts to our education and our healthcare systems. We're seeing hospitals close across the state. Yet these counties that are receiving these data centers and receiving arguably the burden of the data centers are not even receiving the potential benefit that they could get from it. And also, just as an aside, I don't want to ramble too long on this slide, but also in places where data centers are located, the property taxes or the property value of those homes can go down too, so it's going to also see a reduction in property taxes from just even local residents too. So the benefits might not even be as grand as a 30% increase. Another problematic part of the legislation are restrictions around local control. And this also created an uproar around local municipalities and county commissioners and across nonprofit organizations across the state, including West Virginia Citizen Action. This was the piece that we were most concerned about because it infringed upon the rights of local governments to govern in their spaces. And essentially, this bill would prevent local governments from enacting ordinances around data centers that could restrict or limit them. So, for example, if a county wanted to pass an ordinance that would allow data centers to extract water from the ground, but only up to a certain amount, that would not be allowed. If it wanted to limit sound pollution or light pollution to certain hours of the day, that would not be allowed, which are common pieces of local legislation that communities pass to try to reduce the harm of data centers in the communities that they're located in. So that doesn't sound great. Now we have codified this regulatory structure that is really enabling data centers and making it so that local communities don't have as much power to push back against it. And before we get to the ways in which communities can push back against it and build power, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the depressing aspects of data centers, including the environmental, economic, and health risks on a general level. So it may come as no surprise, data centers have a massive water demand. Just large data centers alone can consume up to 5 million gallons of water a day. And that's the equivalent of a town that's anywhere from 10,000 to 50,000 people. That's like all of the water in Morgantown. A medium-sized data center can consume up to 110 million gallons of water per year for cooling purposes. So that's thinking about 1,000 households. There are many communities in West Virginia that are fewer than 1,000 households. So we're talking about just one of these data centers has the potential to eat up a significant chunk of our water. Going back to the example of Tucker County, just last summer in 2024, Tucker County and specifically the towns of Thomas and Davis were facing water scarcity. When I think of Thomas and Davis or Tucker County, I don't really think of water scarcity. I think of it as a beautiful, luscious place with abundant water, but that's not wholly true. The town of Thomas had to go on a boil water notice because of the water was dried up from where they were extracting it from, and they had to redirect it and extract it from another source, which wasn't treated the same way. So just in this one example, we've seen without the data center, there'd be challenges of accessible and clean and abundant water in Tucker County. So with the addition of the largest data center proposed in the state, can you imagine the impact on local residents' water supply? Even more, there are concerns around land use, where they're locating it. Is it an ecologically important location, a historically important location? What is it being repurposed from in the case of Davis, in an area with a pristine national forest, a lot of ecological value? And there's also risk of noise pollution and light pollution, which can be a burden to nearby communities, of course, and incredibly irritating and also detrimental to one's health. And it can affect migratory species. So it can have impacts on species that are not even local in their journeys across this area. And then on top of that, there's risk of air pollution and various types of emission impact, whether that's transport, of folks to and from facilities. Granted, these data centers create very few jobs past construction, but that will have an air emissions impact. The emissions from operating the facility, and then also what is the microgrid being powered by. So in the case of the 3 data centers that are currently permitted for power plants, they are all 3 gas-fired power plants. The ones in Mingo County, if they operate at the capacity that they're permitted for, would be one of the largest polluters in the state, second only to the Harrison and John Amos power plants. The way we like to talk about it in our organizing spaces around data centers is we describe the one in Tucker County is the largest, the ones in Mingo County would be the dirtiest, and the one in Mason County is the dumbest idea. It's just really illogical, and we can get into it a bit later. They're all pretty dirty, large, and dumb, though, to be frank, but if you want to compare them. And that's actually what we're going to do right now with the air quality issues in particular. So here's the slide from earlier that shows where they are, so you can refresh yourself on the locations and the names if I reference one. So the one in Tucker County's fundamental data. Down south is Transgas or Adams Fork, and then on the river is Fidelis or the Monarch data center. And so I apologize, I wonder if you can see it all this way, maybe more. So this is a table with the emissions proposed in the air construction permits for the gas-fired power plants for Tucker and the 2 in Mingo. The bottom one in Mason County is not directly related to the Monarch or Fidelis data center. It's a completely separate plant, but it is by the same company in the general vicinity. And we're waiting on the decision for that permit currently. But these top 3 are all permitted currently, and like already for Tucker County going through appeals, and likely Mingo will go through appeals as well. And you can kind of see, again, this might not make as much sense, but we can compare especially for particulate matter, total particulate matter, so think like dust. That's something that we can easily test with air monitoring that can have a health impact, especially in places like West Virginia with high rates of respiratory disease. We see in Tucker County it's upwards of 100 tons per year of particulate matter, of total particulate matter. Mingo County, each one has about 215, so each Mingo County site is more than double the particulate matter pollution of that of Tucker County. And then this separate bioenergy facility in Mingo County is about 60 tons per year. So just to kind of compare what the pollution is coming from, the scale of each of these facilities, you can see that. And also giving their population. So the one in Mason County, again, is a separate plant, but has the largest population in proximity to it. In addition to these environmental and health risks, there's also economic risks. And in particular, we're seeing as data centers grow and build across the country and are built in local communities, energy demand go up. Just like the demand for water increases, these data centers require a massive amount of energy to operate. That was part of the intention of the microgrid bill in saying that, well, these data centers can't take power from our grid, so they have to build their own microgrid to operate. And you can see here that the data center energy growth across the world, in particular China and the United States, are predicted to account for nearly 80% of the global growth in electricity consumption just by data centers. And this, as a result, even with microgrids or not, is seeing that our utility forecasts, especially in the PJM network, is going to require 50 gigawatts of peak electricity. And this could be enough power to power more than 20 million households. That's basically all the homes in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, and Maryland combined. So that's a really high population. of the data center energy demand. And as we see this energy demand go up, we're also going to see electricity costs go up. We already are facing, in West Virginia, perpetual rate hikes, whether you're in AEP territory or like you all in Mon Power territory, as a result of continuing to artificially sustain our coal-fired power plants past their economic viability. Adding data centers to the mix, we're going to see that increase even further. In other states like Virginia, where it is considered a data center hub, which Governor Morrisey is trying to model us in West Virginia after, we're seeing their power costs being raised as a result of data centers. And states like Virginia are embracing clean energy policies more so than us and are reaping the benefits from it. And so even in states like Virginia that have not seen electricity rate costs as a result of their grid be affected, we're starting to see them increase more with this data center boom. And so in some areas, Bloomberg estimates that our wholesale electricity costs could increase as much as 267% more than it did 5 years ago in areas near data centers. So because we don't necessarily have a data center of the scale of the ones proposed and going through permitting right now, we don't have data on how that could affect our electricity costs. But looking at examples across the country, we can expect it to raise our costs here in West Virginia further. And to the point, you might be thinking, well, wait, you just said microgrids, are they building the power on site to power the data center? How would that affect our grid? As a part of the HB 2014 legislation that enabled those microgrids, they also had provisions in there to maintain our electrical grid coal-fired power plants at a certain capacity factor, because they did not want these microgrids coming in to somehow discourage the burning of coal for electricity purposes. So there were provisions in there too that would maintain coal-fired power generation at certain levels for the grid that we use. So this is all really depressing, and I'm very sorry for that, but that is what I was asked to come and speak about. So I hope this part is a little more joyful or hopeful. I know y'all at MICA have been doing some incredible organizing and resistance work here in Morgantown and across West Virginia. And I think this section around what interventions can we take to address this data center and AI crisis in the state can maybe inspire some actions for you all. So before I go into some specifics, I want to touch on this idea that may not be new to you all, new to all of you, but this idea of inside versus outside game, this idea of the larger movement ecology that we have in our progressive spaces or in whatever your movement is. And so there's this idea, we might see folks across movements or nonprofit spaces butting heads about, no, I want to do it this way, I want to do it this way. We might all have the same mission or the same end goal, but disagreement about how to get there. And especially at Citizen Action Group, we think that's okay. We have our theory of change, which is being a power building organization and organizing through relational organizing and building up a base of people that are trained to organize and push back through mass mobilization, mass protest, and also through canvassing, through one-on-ones, through influencing policy and sending in these members to promote the issues they care about. And so where we are at Citizen Action Group is very much in this structure area and alternatives area. So we're working to mobilize a base of leaders and resources and use that to feed in and out of this idea of mass protest and also provide pressure. So that is kind of where we are. This idea of an inside game is very much more in the world of lobbying and policy, which is incredibly important as well. Where when you think of advocacy versus organizing, this is more in the world of internal advocacy. Alternatives, you can think about that as like mutual aid or building alternative structures and systems to meet the needs of people where they're at now. So the mutual aid that y'all do and the groups that y'all work with would fall into that category. And of course, mass protest as well. I know y'all are stellar protesters and do amazing rallies. And so each organization isn't necessarily fitting into just one bubble. We ebb and flow kind of through multiple of them. And it also is essential to have multiple organizations prioritizing different parts of the movement. Because if you pull out the inside game, then this web or this ecology collapses. You can think of just our natural ecosystems. If you eliminate one species, like bees, for instance, our entire food systems collapse. If you eliminate a predator from an ecosystem, then we see preys become invasive and grow in population. And so the same can be said about our movements in our progressive sphere. We need every type of change working toward the same mission to have an effective movement ecology. And so I say that because I'm going to talk about a few different interventions around data centers from a few of these lenses. And one of them is policy. So something that a number of organizations are talking about right now is how can we make HB 2014 less bad? There were some improvements during legislative session. The idea of fully revoking it seems less practical, but how can we go back in and see where did they go wrong and make changes to it? So whether proposing legislation that could make amendments to it, such as giving back some form of local control to local governments, or addressing the idea that our coal-fired power plants have to operate at some level of a capacity factor. There's also the opportunity to develop proactive legislation around any piece of these concerns that we've talked about, meeting with our electeds, and then also providing evidence and research. Now on the organizing side, something that we are focusing more on at West Virginia Citizen Action is we're having one-on-ones, we're canvassing, we're hosting community meetings in communities where these are taking place, we're training folks, and then also mobilizing them when the moment comes. So we've been focusing more of our attention on Mingo and Mason counties because that's where we've seen more of a need. The folks at Tucker United are stellar, and so they're taking the lead and we're supporting where it makes sense. And what I consider kind of in the middle of that, a very specific intervention that I'll talk more specifically about now, because it's kind of my baby at West Virginia Citizen Action Group, is our community science program, where we do community air monitoring. And so that I'd say is the enmeshment of policy and research and organizing. We meet people where they're at a grassroots level, and for those that would like an air quality sensor, we install it for them and train them on how to maintain it and how to interpret it and how to report concerns. We also then have access to that data that we can do analysis on to inform policy or to inform what actions we want to take around specific areas and geographies. So these community science programs are very much at the intersection of organizing and policy. And a little more on that is our continuous air quality monitoring program. So we use these low-cost air quality sensors. They're Purple Air Flex sensors. And they're just about $300. So they're not necessarily the cheapest thing for anyone to just go buy on a whim, but they're not multi-$1,000 devices. And our goal is to install hundreds and hundreds of them across the state. Right now, we're at about 60. For context about what being at 60 means, just in the state of West Virginia, there are only 13 state Department of Environmental Protection or state EPA regulatory air quality sensors across the entire state, just 13. For folks in southern West Virginia, so think about the folks with the data centers in Mingo County, the closest air quality sensors to them are either Huntington or Charleston. So I like a visual, so I don't want to just say cities. So looking here, there's one in Huntington, there's one in Charleston, and there's one in Lewisburg. pretty much the entirety of the southern coal fields have no regulatory air quality sensors. And so the way our regulatory system works with the Department of Environmental Protection is that the public relies on these government sensors for access to their air quality data, or private sensors like the ones that we install. And then for reporting on pollution, industry self-reports that to the DEP for regulation and for monitoring. There's often concerns in communities around, well, how can we trust folks that maybe have violated, or folks that have not felt like good actors in their communities. And that data also, the public cannot easily access, if at all. So those are some of the concerns and why we're trying to get up these privately owned, low-cost sensors across the state to get a better snapshot of the air people are breathing. And these sensors test for a few things, primarily particulate matter. So remember when we were looking at the table of the air pollution proposed from the gas-fired power plants on microgrids for data centers? That is one of the key concerns. Particulate matter is made up of particulate matter 2.5 is what we really care about. And that's made up of particles that are less than 2.5 micrometers in diameter. That's about 1/10,000th of an inch, so very tiny. It could be dust, soot, organic, or chemicals. And it can come from a lot of sources like cars, trucks, factories, plants, wood burning. And it can be a serious health concern if it's inhaled. So if you remember especially wildfires, the Canadian wildfires that really spread and decreased the air quality on the East Coast significantly, particulate matter was a deep concern from that. Another thing the specific sensors we use test for are something called volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. So those are organic compounds with a high vapor pressure, so they can easily evaporate and be a gaseous substance. And they come primarily from cars, motor vehicles, and from industrial processes. And so they can have short or long-term adverse health effects. And so some examples are like benzene or ethylene oxide. If you've heard about, especially in the Charleston area where I live, in South Charleston and Institute, those towns just outside of Charleston have been designated toxic cancer hotspots because of ethylene oxide pollution from nearby Union Carbide, or formerly Union Carbide, now Dow chemical plants. And those are just toxic chemicals as well. These sensors, these purple air sensors, cannot test for things like carbon dioxide or methane. However, especially with methane, if you're thinking of a leaking gas well, if there's methane leaking, there's likely volatile organic compounds in it as well, so that can be an indicator of something wrong. So these low-cost sensors don't do everything, but they can tell you a lot and give you a snapshot of your general air quality. And so they have a publicly available map where you can look at the air sensors closest to you at map.purpleair.com. And I have in the back of the room some like newsletters and these little zines that I make that are like a little booklet, and you can take one if you want, that has the website and how to interpret the air quality on it. And even our federal fire map with the EPA extracts this data and uses it on their fire map to warn of wildfire risk. And so it basically goes on a color scale of green to maroon. That's why it's called purple air. It's just maroon air would not sound, I think, as cute of a name. So with that, I want to, before we move on to some action opportunities, I want to share about this intervention in particular. I don't think I've connected it back to data centers very clearly, and that this has been a tool that we've been organizing around data centers by getting baseline air quality data before these gas-fired power plants and before these data centers are built. So we worked with Tucker United to get them about a dozen air quality sensors and train them on how to install them, and then they've just been putting them up and doing a stellar job at making sure they have a good distribution of air quality sensors in Tucker County. So whether or not this plant is built, they now have an ability to see what their air quality is before it is built, if it is built. The same for Mason County and Mingo County. We're also putting up air quality sensors there. The trickier part with Mason and Mingo County is there's already a lot of pollution in those areas, so, but it can also support folks in knowing what their air quality is so that they can make decisions based on their own health risk. So the last thing I want to talk about is some opportunities to take action in West Virginia. I'd be remiss coming to talk about this and not share some how to get involved opportunities. Y'all are already involved because you're here and you work with MICA. So I want to share some opportunities at the statewide citizen action group of how you all could get involved, or if MICA wants to get involved at a locally in Morgantown on these. So one is training. So at West Virginia Citizen Action Group, we host a number of trainings. We like to say we do not organize to train folks, we train people to then go organize in their own communities. The next is becoming a community scientist, so hosting an air quality sensor yourself. And finally, canvassing for a cause. All of these data center site fights are constantly in need of people to support, whether that's text banking, phone banking, knocking on doors. Providing time is always something that these communities appreciate tremendously. A lot of, however, I realize distance is often an issue, but there's often opportunities to canvass or work with folks virtually as well. So this is a bit of a summary with that. Some specific trainings we have coming up. It's about to launch tomorrow, both of them online, so I can get it to you all via email, or I think Mindy in Morgantown can get it to y'all. But we're going to have a community air monitoring training in a couple weeks on Thursday, November 13th from 6 to 7 p.m. in Morgantown. And then that next Saturday, Mindy will be hosting a Fundamentals of Organizing training here in this room from 10 a.m. to actually 2 p.m. It says 4 p.m. there, but we're shortening it a bit because 6 hours is a long span. And then starting, if none of these work for y'all or it's not the right moment for you, we're going to be launching a digital organizing night school in January 2026. So it'll be every week is like a different subject. So rather than attending a full day of like really intense activity, if you can't give up a whole Saturday, the night school will be like an hour or so a week, every couple weeks for a few weeks, online on Zoom, with folks all across the state. So yeah, and then I mentioned already hosting an air quality sensor. If you're interested in that, we'll have that training here in a few weeks, and I'll teach you how to do it, and I can send you with an air quality sensor. This is what they look like. They're just like softball sized. So they're very small, of course, and they're very durable. I will say that. They can, they're weatherproof. I do not work for this company. I feel like I should get a commission at this point from so many that I've put up across the state. But yeah, very durable little devices. And basically, to do good science, we want to have a larger sample size. So we're trying to spread out the grid across the state. My long-term vision is I'd love to see a way to see your air quality every mile in West Virginia. I realize that may be a fever dream, but we're sure trying to at least get as many up as we possibly can. So, and then with that, I want to share my contact information. You can always feel free to reach out to me. And you might probably already be connected with CAG since y'all are a part of MICA. But I'll leave my contact information up there as well, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have. Yes.
During your talk, you mentioned the issuance of permits for these data centers. How exactly does the permitting process work? It sounds like they're permitted, and then all of a sudden you've got a problem. Is it possible to stop the permits?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. I see Jim giggling a bit. I will say, to my knowledge, the DEP has practically never denied a permit. So that can be pretty disheartening. However, there are multiple series of permits that need to take place. So these ones that we're talking about are all air construction permits. For the one in Mason County, for instance, we're still waiting on their decision. We're fully anticipating them to grant it. But these sites will likely have to go through permits around water and stormwater. They'll probably have to go through other permitting processes as well. So there's opportunities to challenge or challenge it on different levels. So the case with these air quality permits, when we turned folks out to the public hearing to talk about it and to talk about their concerns, we had to really train the residents that went that the DEP will only consider things that you talk about that are substantive to the permit. So if someone came and said, I'm really concerned about how this is going to affect the groundwater or how this is going to affect my drinking water, they throw that comment out. They don't care because it's only focused on the Division of Air Quality and the air construction permit. They'll say, if and when there's a water permit, that's when you can talk about that. And even then, sometimes it's out of scope. So it really shows that there are deeper entrenched issues in the system in which we permit and how residents can be involved in that process. It's not exactly democratic, and it's not exactly considering the impacts of residents the way that I believe, at least, it should. But to your question, can we stop it? Can we stop the permit? I think with a lot of organizing, a lot of strategy is disrupting, delaying, and defunding. So I like to say the 3 Ds of organizing. And with every permit, if you can get it extended, get a public hearing. On one hand, there is opportunity, and I do believe we were able to do this in Mason County with this bioenergy plant by offering substantive comments that could possibly make it a little less dangerous. Again, that feels not as fun, like, hooray, we made the plant a little bit less dangerous for the local residents. But nevertheless, that is a win. And also, the longer you extend out the processes, it also makes it less financially viable. So we saw that with the Mountain Valley Pipeline in particular. Of course, it took an act of Congress to just push it over the line without much fair process. So it's kind of a no and answer. I don't really think there is so many opportunities to deny a permit, but there is opportunities to challenge them. And we're seeing that right now in Tucker County with appeals of the permit they were granted.
Is there a time which notice is given that a permit is to be considered? Is there a publication or something?
Yes. So the way the process works, I'll just use the air permit, for example, is the company will apply for a permit, and that will be filed in the database. And really, the only way you can look for that is if you are going into their public systems, but they're not very accessible online, seeing when they apply. Then the DEP has to consider the application and determine it complete. Once they determine that the application is complete or not complete, then they can move on to the next step. If they determine the application is not complete, sometimes the DEP will work with the company to make sure their application is better and is completed. Now, once we're to the point of it being complete, whether it's with help from DEP or it was complete from submission, the permit is then now submitted to DEP to be considered for a draft permit. That is then where the public comment period is considered. Once the DEP marks it complete, issues a draft permit, which can take any period of time, it's not a set in stone. They issue the public notice that the DEP has issued a draft permit and that it's a public notice for folks to provide comment on it within around usually 30 days. Is that 30 days? And that is then when people can submit requests for an extension, for a public hearing, for a public meeting, because those are not automatically granted. So an organizing strategy that happened in Tucker County, that happened in Mingo County, and in Mason County was really meeting residents, informing them that this was happening in their community, getting their feedback on what they thought about it. Folks always ended up wanting to have a community meeting, so that happened in all of those locations. And then I talked to, especially in Mason County, that's where I worked the most, folks that didn't want this in their backyard, or maybe did want it, but only if it met certain restrictions, which it didn't seem like it was going to meet, and then people that did not want it at all and just wanted it shut down. Like, there was a whole range. But regardless, there was common ground on, wow, they're doing this in just 30 days without us knowing, and why hasn't the company talked to us? Why hasn't the government talked to us? So a lot of like distrust of those systems and wanting to have their voice heard. And so with that, then folks continuously submitted requests for extensions in an in-person public meeting. They wanted the government officials to come to their town and talk to them face to face. And that happened. And so that, again, opened it up for another 2 weeks or another 30 days. Something we saw in Mingo County, which I've not really seen many cases, is we saw a double extension. So we got the initial extension, but they only granted a meeting virtually. And if you know anything about Mingo County, internet is not great there. And folks were furious. They were not able to access the virtual meeting. They weren't happy. And so one of our organizers at CAG helped folks come all the way up from Mingo to the DEP and went in person to deliver their handwritten letters, since they couldn't give a verbal comment because they couldn't get on the call. And from there, demanded another extension than them to actually come in person to Mingo and meet with them. And that worked. So that extended it like basically 2 months longer than it should have. So does that answer your question? Maybe I gave too many stories. Okay.
How is the data going to get to these centers? I mean, we don't have the best internet service in West Virginia, so how are they going to get the data to put into these centers?
I have the same question. Yeah, that is, I am not a computer scientist, so I do not know. And I think that's a concern that folks have. Like, 2 data centers in Mingo County where folks can't even access a Zoom call or a Google Meet call. How are they going to be able to do complicated cloud computing there?
Could that be one of the stipulations, that they have to provide an internet access to the entire community or the county?
I think that could be a stellar policy intervention. I think that could be an idea that folks demand be made possible, especially with this legislative session coming up. So I think it's possible. It's a matter of, will the legislators do it? And I think that is all the more reason to push for it. So I think that could be something that folks could rally around and push for. I think I saw your hand and then yours.
Sure. Has there been air monitoring around existing data centers, and has that data then been used to extrapolate to likely additional causes of, additional cases of things like asthma and COPD, and also like estimates of what's sometimes called YPLL, the years of productive life lost?
That's a really good question that I'm very sorry I do not have the answer to, but I can look into, and I think that's something that we should be looking into to inform our work going forward.
Because there are data centers that are up and running, like there was one in central New York on Seneca Lake that was a mothball power plant that they revved up again. And I don't know if it's still going now, but anyway, but there have been other places. It just seems like we, I think in this state we just assume that bad air is what we get, but it's holding people back. So.
You're absolutely right. And I think one of the big questions too is we see, especially data centers, let's say like in Northern Virginia, that is a massive data center hub, and they have a very different energy mix than we do in West Virginia. And of course, now what we're looking at is microgrids and just a gas plant to power it. And even if it was on our grid, we're primarily coal-fired powered still at like 88%. And so I think also it's important to look at like which of these places, what is the location and what is their energy grid at? Are they on a microgrid? Are they not? And if they're on a microgrid, what kind of microgrid? Is it a gas plant or is it solar? These are 2 very different things. There is a question back there.
Yeah, I just comment. They're not going to be transferring the data to these data centers over the internet. That's ridiculous. They're going to deliver the data on some sort of hard drive or something like that, and then the energy use is in crunching the data once it's there. So you deliver a big chunk of data there, and then the
choose on that data. So the old internet connections for these the people in Silicon Valley or New York or Boston or somewhere who are actually running the thing and are the ones making the decent salaries that are going to be, communicating with it, telling.
That's a great point too. And I think then there's also questions of how are these hard drives being transferred in and out, especially in rural places.
You could
Yeah.
do that easily by truck. We're not talking about enormous.
For sure, yeah. Or I'm talking, so some of the ones the two in Mingo County, one is on an old surface mine site, for instance. You're going up some old windy roads. Like these, I guess, hard drives would also have to be transferred or transported probably decent distances based on where they're coming from as well. Yeah.
What's the business model of something like this? I mean, do they build it and then they assume that someone will come, or are they built for Amazon or for a specific company that they already know what they're going to do? And how many of them are crypto miners?
That's something we don't know at this time, and I think is one of the big questions of all the communities, is what are these data centers specifically being used for and who are they serving? All three of these companies do not have great track records or much history. So the one in Tucker County, Fundamental Data, has not done practically anything, and there's very little paper trail on who they even are. The one in Mason County, Fidelis New Energy, is a Dutch company that just started in 2019, and they are now claiming their first big projects that they want to build are basically experiments in West Virginia, being a bioenergy with carbon capture plant that has never been done to the scale that they're proposing in the entire state or country. A hydrogen plant that's also not been, a gas-based hydrogen plant with carbon capture that's also not been done to scale in the country, and now also, and then finally the data center. So whether they're making false promises and eating up federal dollars or not in that process, because for instance, this Fidelis project in Mason County was announced as part of the Hydrogen Hub program, the ARCH2 Hydrogen Hub. And so they were expecting to get federal dollars from that to support them, and then tax credits from carbon capture. And so a lot of that's also up in the air now. And then finally, the ones in Mingo County is by a guy called Adam Victor, so that's Adam's Fork. They are also proposing that ammonia plant in the same location where the same guy got a permit 10 plus years ago and over 10 years ago now to do a coal to liquids plant, and then got the permit and then just failed because it was just a dumb business venture. So he has a track record of proposing things that don't work, getting some tax benefits, and then leaving before it's built. He also has some campaign violations for wrongly donating to Joe Manchin in a certain way. So he has some records there too. I see a question in the back.
Yeah, well, this also goes back to whether AI and data centers are a bubble or not. Are we building data centers because there is the demand, or are we just building it because there's this idea that there will be demand? I was just, before this, watching a report on the AI bubble in the US, saying that they're investing in the next 10 years a projected over $100 trillion into AI and data centers. Yeah. And the AI industry made $1 billion last year. So there is this massive overinvestment and kind of just putting infrastructure out there without there being any purpose for it yet.
Yeah, and I think that is the question that we don't know the answer to, but I think we can speculate. The worst case scenario feels unfortunately likely, in my eyes at least. Well, and yeah, we're seeing at the federal level incentives for AI and building that up, trying to compete with China in their development and growth of data centers. And so it's a question of are we racing to see who can do it first? And then if that's the case, are there more proposals than necessary? The question is, why are we not strategically locating these in places where there's the least amount of harm, or doing them efficiently? I mean, I guess the answer is capitalism, and that's a deeper conversation that is not my topic of conversation right now. But I think that is it boom or bust is the question that we're going to see, and unfortunately, I fear we're going to see something especially with the natural gas boom and bust, I fear we're going to see something much larger if we start trying to build out these data centers in West Virginia and then they don't even operate.
I just wanted to point out that I don't think that Patrick Morrissey or a lot of the Republicans in Charleston give a shit if it's a boom or bust. They think that this is quick cash, you know? But they're not thinking about our communities. That's our job. Our job is to, you know, rally and tell them that we're not going to take this line down. So I just wanted to throw it out there.
Yeah, hell yeah. You and then you.
You said that Morrissey supports this build-up. Why? What's his public argument for it benefiting West Virginia? If you addressed this before I came in,
Oh, no, it's a great question. And yeah, I mean, what is his reason, like, what is his good reason? I don't know necessarily if he has one.
Thinks it's going to bring more economic opportunities to West Virginia ultimately.
He has, especially in the legislative session, so this HB 2014 I keep referencing and talked a bit about, he did a big press conference and in his like State of the State also talked about the potential for data centers and energy growth in West Virginia and has made it kind of his big campaign, his priority as governor. And so once he did that, that's when this HB 2014 microgrid legislation got expedited and greenlit and became the priority of the GOP to get done across the state. And very quickly after this bill was introduced, that's when we saw the permit applications come through for Tucker County. And then that's when we saw the applications come through for Mingo County. We'd already known about the Mason County one for a while because it goes back to the past administration tied to Arch 2 money. But the ones that we're really facing right now in Mingo and Tucker were seemingly a direct response of this legislation that Morrissey announced as his priority. And so he's claiming it will bring jobs, it will bring energy boom. More recently, in the past month or so, he had a conference saying he wants to have 50 by 50, meaning 50 gigawatts of power by 2050 in West Virginia, which is significantly more than we have currently, like far more than double. And primarily wanting to use fossil fuels for that. So whether it's political pandering or, you know, there's, I think, a lot of different assumptions as to why he's doing it besides not being logical. I think your hand and then you.
Yeah, it seems like our existing utilities are at best uninspired, at worst just plain crooked and corrupt. So given like the first, because Bomb Power is part of First Energy, as I understand, that's the group that got caught paying that $60 million fine in Ohio because we were bribing. But are these rotten utilities fixing to make some money out of it?
Could you rephrase that question or ask it again? I'm sorry.
Could the rotten utilities that are already in our state get some money out of this whole deal?
That's an interesting question. I think the way that it was addressed, it was AEP in particular and First Energy's interest in this HB 2014 legislation to have provisions in the bill that would protect power plants to continue to operate at that certain capacity factor so that they would continue to burn coal and that the grid would continue to have sell a certain amount of power to AEP. And so that, I think, is where our utilities' interests lied in HB 2014. But again, it's like, you know, microgrids. They're off the grid, so why would AEP care? But I think they're upset about probably not being able to sell electricity to these large buyers. I wouldn't say they're against it because I think that some of their concerns were addressed in trying to ensure that the grid was operating at a certain level. And I also speculate that this 50 gigawatts by 2050 by Governor Morrissey as well is like trying to increase energy demand beyond just these microgrids, like through the grid as well, and increasing fossil fuel fired production in the state, which could appease the utilities. Did you have a question?
Yeah, there seems to be a certain level of panic involved in getting these centers established. So I wonder, do they have a special level of security around these plants? Or?
Could you repeat his question?
Yeah, so he said there seems to be a panic around getting these centers developed. Is there a certain level of security around these plants? Do you mean security as in security that they will get built, or
No, like
protection?
having National Guard around them or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Because it's a lot of money in a short, a small space.
Right, and I mean, I suppose it also depends on like what is the data being used for, and that's something we don't know yet. I mean, there could be certain data that's more sensitive than others, but we also don't know specifically what these data centers are going to be primarily operating as.
It probably won't help you much, or any of us. Whatever they're doing is not for our benefit, we're pretty sure of that.
That's my read on it, and most of the community members we've worked with, how they feel as well, but or what we've heard thus far as well. Yeah, it's certainly, it feels like it's very reactionary at this time. A year ago, I never would have thought this is what we'd be primarily working on. Because a year ago, we were really concerned about Arch 2 and the hydrogen hub and making sure that it was operating, if it were to operate in good faith with communities and make sure there were community benefits. And now we're doing something completely different because the political moment shifted so drastically. Yes.
So there is proposed power lines that are supposed to be coming from Pennsylvania, going through West Virginia, going to Virginia. I'm not totally up on that, but I thought some of that was to possibly go to power data centers in Virginia.
It is. Yes, it is.
And that West Virginia will not receive any money for that.
Yeah, so that is, I didn't touch on that today. I'm not necessarily the person to talk about it, but that is certainly a concern. The Marl power line that would be traversing to Virginia with no benefit to West Virginia is a whole other piece of this, because transmission lines, especially if we're building out, if we are building out 50 gigawatts by 2050, like Governor Morrissey says, there's going to need to be a massive transmission build out as well. And that comes with a number of risks and perhaps harm to those local communities.
How much of the permitting process is done at the state level versus oversight from the national level? Because one of the things that Shelley Mercapito was touting as a major big thing for the big ugly bill was that it would streamline the permitting process, which there weren't any more details in that, but one can assume that it means easing regulations and sort of eliminating some of the delaying tactics that you're talking about. And so can the EPA at the national level or federal level come down to the DEP here and mandate that they do an even worse job than they're already doing?
I think those are a couple different things that you're talking about too. So one with the streamlining permitting that Capito and Manchin talked a lot about when he was in office, which is the result of the result of the bill that passed that enabled the Mountain Valley Pipeline to get built. There's this massive backlog, especially of transmission line, essentially permits to move forward at the federal level. And so that was, I think, the intent of that. And it wouldn't necessarily cross paths with DEP for what you're asking. However, we are seeing a trend across the country of states getting primacy or like primary oversight over permitting processes. So the one that we just got in West Virginia, it happened at the start of the new year. It was a big push. I think it was a giveaway, this is my speculation, a giveaway to Senator Manchin before he left office by President Biden, which was primacy over Class 6 injection, which is the injection of carbon dioxide underground to store it. that is permitted at the EPA federal level, and at the time only 2 states had primacy, and a couple more had been applying for it. It was us, and there was a hearing on New Year's Eve, or maybe the day before New Year's Eve, and then like a week or 2 later, they granted primacy to the DEP to provide oversight to these Class 6 carbon injection wells, and that is the intent is to speed up the permitting process with that specifically, because to get a permit for a Class 6 well at the federal level, there is just this massive backlog and they didn't have the capacity to do it. At Citizen Action Group, we have a lot of concerns with carbon injection as a tactic because it can infiltrate the groundwater, it can have leaks. At least from an engineering perspective, things can look really great in a model, but not in practice. Life is not necessarily an engineering model. And we've already seen carbon pipelines leak and carbon injection wells leak of the limited ones that have existed. So that was intentfully to expedite those permits. And we're already now seeing a permit that was sent to the federal EPA and is now being shifted to DEP for this same complex of plants in Mason County. That will be a big fight coming up in the new year. But that process will take a little bit longer than the traditional DEP process. But still, it will be expedited far quicker than if it had to go through the federal process.
Any more questions for Morgan? I know she's got another shirt.
Thank you. And I left some Citizen Action Group newsletters and some stickers and some little zines in the back and little flyers if you want anything. And we also have an RFP for artists going on clean air issues. So if you know any artists, we have a request for proposals for a paid opportunity, and the deadline is in a week. So it's just a very quick Google form though, so it's not a big application. So feel free to check those out in the back. Thank you.